One of the biggest questions when it comes to investing in real estate is people asking, is this property a good deal? Some might think it has to do with it having a nice view, being in the city, having big windows, or luxury finishes that makes it a good investment. And that's far from the case. Knowing your numbers and your calculations is what's going to set you up for a good investment. And planning your numbers is just what's going to save you from losing thousands and making a bad investment. And that's where we get into underwriting investment properties. The first thing when it comes to underwriting your property is knowing your base numbers. These are all just going to be general numbers. So let's just look at an example. Let's look at a $400,000 unit, condo, whatever the case may be. Look at the down payment, just about $75,000, which is just about 20%. Just a note, if your down payment is here in Canada, if your down payment is under 20%, a mortgage insurance will be charged. So in this case, we're going to be going with right at 20%. Right? Then we're going to go look at your loan amount. Interest rates, we're just going to use a general number of 4%. Your closing cost of $8,000. So base numbers are the beginning to underwriting. It's the main number that we're going to go from here. We're going to get into step 2 of our numbers for calculating our deal, our potential deal, right? And this is the part where we're talking about monthly expenses after purchase. These are what we like to call your reoccurring costs. Every month, what you need to factor into your expenses and how much it's going to cost you to run this property. First, going to get into the biggest one, which obviously everybody knows about, is your mortgage, right? We talked about earlier, a $325,000 loan from our $400,000 property, right? We're using an interest rate of 4% per year for 25 years. This is going to work out to $1,700. Next, we're going to talk about property tax. It's a good way to calculate the numbers of what you're going to be spending for the year by breaking it down month by month, right? Usually it's about 1% of the value. Obviously, this can depend on what city you're in, municipality, all this kind of stuff. But let's just go general 1% of the value of the property. $400,000 home, we're talking about a $4,000 property tax for the year, which works out to about $333 per month. Then we're going to get into insurance, $150 a month. Again, these are just general numbers. Reserves, $200 a month. Reserves is almost like what you want to call an emergency fund, right? Say a window breaks, your microwave goes out, and you're renting this property, tenant makes a hole in the wall, could be anything. This is almost like a problem-solving fund, right? Say some months, for example, it might be a perfect month, no problem. The next month, you might have a plumbing problem that costs you $600. So factoring in $200 a month per se, depending on the value of the property, is a good range to be safe. Property management, $150 a month, right? Property management goes from anywhere from $100 to $300 per month. Say even if you are self-managing, you're not using a company, you're not getting help from anybody, I would say still factor in this $150 cost. For example, the time it's going to take you to communicate with tenants, drive to your property, check if everything's going on. The cost is going to be when you want to relist the property or remarket the property is going to equal the same to a property management fee, right? So once we calculate all of our monthly expenses after purchase, this is going to be the total cost that we need to factor in every month for keeping this property afloat. And now we get into the fun part, step 3, our income, right? So the main thing from a real estate property is going to generate one main source of income. Unlike expenses where there's a long list of things to factor in, real estate property, there's one thing, and that is your rents, right? So in this case, our $400,000 property, let's just say it's located in downtown Toronto, downtown Miami, and it's got the sickest views. We're going to look at a $2,900 a month rent, right? This is what you're going to receive from your tenant on a month in, month out basis. That is going to be your main source of income. But I like to factor in something called an occupancy rule, right? Say, for example, an occupancy rule is not every single month of the year you might have a tenant paying rent. Say if there's a month where your tenant moves out or you're looking for a new tenant, $2,700 a month of effective income. This is going to be your main source and one of your only sources of income as a real estate investor. Yes, we could talk about appreciation and how that works over year to year, and that's the second form of income, but that's not something we can calculate monthly, and that's very dependent on your property and what location you're in. And just like any way to calculate your deal, the biggest way to find it is by calculating your profit and your loss, right? So we're going to talk about our income, what we calculated in step 3, which is based on our rent and our occupancy rate, our total income of $2,700, right? And then we're going to look at our expenses with our property management, with our mortgage, totaling to $2,500, right? This is where we're going to get our monthly cash flow, the number that everyone loves to see the most when investing in a real estate deal, right? So in this deal, we're looking at about $222 per month with the numbers I've used and example used. So it looks like at the end of the day, this property would cash flow positive. So now we're finally able to tell the full return of this example of the investment property, right? And this is what like investors, and a common term in the industry is called cash on cash return. And the way you calculate it is by totaling your annual cash flow, which is your monthly cash flow, times by 12, right? By the amount of cash you invested in the deal. It's going to include your down payment and your closing costs in this example, right? And times by 100 just to get your percentage. Monthly cash flow is $222 per month, times by 12, and we get our annual cash flow, which is the number you see here. And the 83,000 is your down payment and your closing costs of total cash invested, times by 100, and you're going to get, this property is going to return 3.3%, right? Cash on cash return. So this is just a general breakdown of how to use some general numbers, but how to specifically know what you're going to be getting involved in before the deal happens, before you offer, before you close, before the deals even happen, to let you know if your property is going to be a good investment or a bad investment, and if it's going to hit your goals or not.